I really probably couldn't think of a better lecture to end these 2 days than this one. And fortunately, I can say I actually had the idea and put it all down before the 2 days started. so it's not that I decided that I was going to say all this based on what we heard over the past couple of days, but actually this is something that was going on in my head for probably about a year since we came up with the conference idea and date. Just since no one's here to introduce me, I'll say what I've been doing the past few months. Since actually starting just before my son Maayan's and daughter-in-law Sharon's wedding was I started to walk again because I was afraid that when we got to the wedding and I was going to be dancing a lot, I would collapse. And the reason I never walked regularly is because it was boring. And so then I realized, wow, I have this technology thing. I have this thing called a smartphone, which can get me all sorts of interesting podcasts. And so my father would say, make sure you read a lot, and make sure you read a lot also about people who you don't agree with. And so I started to listen to all sorts of people. So it was Sam Harris, it was Dan Dennett, it was Jonathan Sachs, it was everybody. And you'll see over the next, half an hour, 45 minutes, what goes inside this rabbi psychologist's head. I couldn't find anybody I disagreed with. Is that I tried. I really did. I couldn't disagree with Dawkins. I couldn't disagree with Dennett. Of course, I could disagree with everybody, and a little bit I could disagree. I can always disagree. Just ask my wife, Sarah Lee. I can disagree with anything if I put my mind to it. But by and large, I couldn't really disagree with everything. And so you'll see, as I said, what goes inside this very interesting mind that as a summary lecture of these past couple of days. So I want to go over a couple of underlying assumptions that we've heard, and again, I didn't come up with this last night, that we are biological beings, and genes therefore have a significant impact on behavior, not only on how we look, but also how we behave. Genes are always interacting with our environment. It doesn't matter. The gene doesn't make our destiny. Our genes are interacting with our environment, and rites and rituals are cultural mimetic responses to biological needs. And believe it or not, I added Hume's Ought Is solution 2 days ago. I didn't speak about it with Craig, and I don't think it's holding up anymore. And I really want to get to the position where we say that there are some ises that do lead to some shoulds or oughts. It's not something that it's not something that we really have to hold up anymore. Is it going to be easy to make the leap from the is to the should? It's not going to be easy. But I think that we will be able to do some of at least that initial inching forward tonight. So we start with know your enemy. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is. And Darwin says, I fully subscribe to the judgment of those writers who maintain that of all the differences between man, he only spoke about man. Okay, so the differences between man and the lower animals, the moral sense or conscience is by far the most important. This was Charles Darwin when he wrote The Descent of Man. Any animal, whatever, endowed with well-marked social instincts would inevitably acquire a moral sense or a conscience. In other words, because we have this mushy stuff, this biological brain, and because we have this body, we are going to develop some type of moral sense or conscience. And what Darwin is saying is that the apes have it, and the rats have it, and the dogs have it. And I suppose what he's challenging us to figure out is what is ape morality and what is ape conscience. And it's not just human conscience and not human morality, but they actually do have something to do with what we would say is morality. And since I think Darwin is telling us that means that our morality comes from this sense of the fact that we are corporeal beings. And one change which I did make, this was before my father spoke, but I said any being, whatever, endowed with well-marked social instincts would inevitably acquire a moral sense or a conscience. So whether that being is what we describe as biological or what we describe as artificially developed, that being may have conscience. It may be that we decide that it doesn't really matter. And if we look, we say, Vayitzer Adonai Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama v'yipach ba'apav nishmat chayim v'hi adam lenefesh chaya, that God created the person, ha'adam, min ha'adama. And if we don't really realize that the fact that we share somewhere between 60 and 90% or 98% of our DNA with everything around us, starting from the plants and up to the chimps, if we don't really realize, and I think that we've really forgotten the fact that we can sit and buy our cows from the market, the fact that we've forgotten that we've come from the land has led to an increasing immorality in our society rather than an increase of morality. It's not that the matter doesn't exist. In the past, it may have mattered, but we need to have our morals be informed by science in order to decide whether the consciousness is important. In the past, we were told that morality needs religion because without religion, there is no morality. So we could look at the book of Genesis, Sefer Breshit, and say that that's actually a really good way to raise a dysfunctional family. Right? So is that the morality we want to adopt? I say Mao in 2016 or Tafshin Ayin Zayin. I'm not sure that's what we want to say. Do we want to say that we should go on and murder all of our relatives in order to consolidate our power the way David and Shlomo did? Is that the religion that we want to inform our morality? Are those the decisions we want to make have moral impact on our decisions? Are there moral things in religion? Yeah. But as a book, fundamentally taken, it's not necessarily a moral book. It sets up a certain set of behaviors that maybe we'll see have impact, but it's not necessarily a book of morality. Humans, we know, evolved to live in small groups or clans. They were mostly kin, so therefore it was simple to have a sense of empathy and simple to have a sense of altruism. Paul Bloom recently says that actually empathy isn't such a good thing, and maybe we have to really switch empathy with compassion. So it was easy to have compassion, one might say, but empathy for your kin is okay, but empathy for everybody else isn't such a great idea, and we'll talk about empathy and compassion a little bit later. So how might this happen? Right? How might this happen if we look at Dawkins and say the genes are successful replicators, but they're selfish? The selfish gene is only interested, if a selfish gene can be interested in anything, is to replicate itself. And therefore we have to understand, if we did live in groups, the gene for altruism enabled group living. It's good to be nice to kin. They carry my genes as well. And it's okay to weed out the freeloaders. The freeloaders who we might call as psychopaths. And you look at the Joseph story, which we're reading in these couple of weeks, that's what they did. Joseph was, in a sense, a psychopath. He had all these dreams that he was telling people, and he was saying, I'm going to be better than you. And so what did the brothers do? They said, Joseph is a free rider. I'm going to get rid of him. I don't want Joseph around anymore. Joseph is this person who is coming to say, I'm going to take over you. I'm going to be that competitive individual within a cooperative society that's going to take over that group of competitors, that group of cooperators. And so the cooperators gathered together, acting a little bit like a hawk, and said, we have to get rid of this hawk because it's not going to be good for us. So they got rid of Joseph. Right? The question I'm going to ask, which again I don't have many answers for, can we, any possible way, generalize this to the world around us, either to our environment or to the world as a physical being? So we heard about group selection. Jonathan Haidt talks about group selections. A group acts as organisms. Wilson and Wilson, 2007, said selfishness beats altruism within groups. Altruistic groups beat selfish groups. Everything else is commentary. Tzei ulmad. Everything else is just, and so they wrote that in 2007. So basically I'm saying I'm an agnostic on group selection. Some people will say it doesn't exist. It's funny to say I'm an agnostic in this, but I'm an agnostic in group selection. But I do say, we have in the Mishnah Avot, Hu haya omer, Hillel would say, Im ein ani li, mi li. If I'm not for myself, who is going to be for me? That sounds a little bit selfish. But it says, Uksha ani la'atzmi, ma'ani. And when I'm for only myself, who am I? If not now, when? So in a sense, what we have to figure out how these groups came together to live in a balance of what is good for me, and therefore is also good for the group. And I think that's what altruism and empathy, or at least compassion, can tell us. So what happens is we have a group consisting of altruistic individuals, and that leads to what looks like, maybe it is, that leads to group success. So if we have that group type of success, then we can say these altruistic people are okay. It's really okay to be an altruist. It's okay because if I act in an altruistic way, if I behave in a way that's good for my kin, then it's pretty good for everybody else. And then once we move out of society where we're living only with kin, it seems it's a fairly easy trick to say, now I can go live in a city, I can live with a group of people in a village, that they aren't all my kin, but I can behave towards them as if we are kin. And that's where I think there was sort of the beginning of an organized religious group. So what I did add here is, you can see there's a hyperlink there, but for whatever reason the Wi-Fi isn't working, so I won't be able to talk about the herd immunity and show you the thing. But one of the fears of this group is, what about those free riders like Joseph? What are those people who want to take advantage of you? What are those people who want to kind of move in and say, we're going to take over? And so what I have there on the question of herd immunity, we know that if 90%, 93% of all kids in all areas are vaccinated against the disease, essentially the disease is eradicated. This connects to, and again, I wrote herd immunity before I heard Tom speak last night. Right? When we look at that and we say herd immunity, 93% of people vaccinating their kids, inoculating their kids, we have no more smallpox. From what I know, it only exists in a couple of labs. We have essentially no more polio. We have essentially no more measles. The link there shows a computer model of what happens if you only have 80% of the kids inoculated, and there happens to be an outbreak in a place like Manhattan. And it's fascinating. The entire population of Manhattan is infected within 4 to 7 days. 4 to 7 days, if you get an outbreak with only 80%. If you notch it up to 90%, the island of Manhattan gets infected to somewhat less, but it gets infected within 7 to 10 days. And if you have 93 or 95% of the kids inoculated, then it stays very local. A few people who are not inoculated around, but it keeps us much healthier. So what about those free riders? What happens? What do we see in places like Berkeley, California? What happens is there's 93% and essentially nobody gets sick. And then what do they say? They say, well, you see, you don't have to inoculate your kids. Because if you don't have to inoculate your kids, because look, those anti-inoculating kids, they're not getting sick. And then that drops to 91% and 90%, and then boom, you have an outbreak of whatever. And we saw that last year, we saw that here in Israel, is that there was the polio virus somehow got into the water system, and there was an outbreak in areas in the Negev, particularly in the Bedouin areas where they have a lower level of inoculation, but it also then spread into Ofakim and a couple of other Israeli cities where there were something like 12 or 13 cases of polio reported last year, where there haven't been any cases of polio reported in Israel in many, many years. So we can see that it really happens. And then what happened is that obviously everybody started to inoculate their kids again. They got rid of the diseased people who were sick. They didn't die. And now the assumption is that the virus is still there, but they're not getting sick. So what did Durkheim, again, this is before I even knew what Ari was going to talk about. Durkheim said this sense of anomie, the condition in which society provides little moral guidance to individuals, is a problem. It can be a problem, and we need the society in order to guide us morally, because we can't have morals that are without the society, and what ultimately happens, it become a mismatch of personal and group standards. I have a sense of what I want to be. It doesn't match with what my society is, or in more cases, is not telling me. And then as a result, we get this sense of enemy, we get this sense of sort of a sense of anarchy, that we don't have any type of morality that enforces some type of behavior. So I said before, groups consisting of altruistic individuals can lead to group success. Again, not addressing the idea of group selection. And one of the fears is, as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says, the notion that authenticity means making our own rules is the loss of the world of value beyond the self. So again, I have to be true to myself. He wrote this in 1990. I think it's even doubly or triply true in 2016, almost 2017. Right? That what's good for me, what feels good, it's what's moral. If it makes me feel good, then that's good. But that's the whole free rider problem. That's the whole freeloader problem coming out, and he puts it out very clearly, is that we need to have a value beyond ourself, and we evolve to have a value beyond ourself. And what we've done in the past 50 to 70 years is we've made that selfishness become much more prominent and said, be authentic, be true to yourself. And if you're only true to yourself, then everything will be good. But I think we're not seeing that. And this is where I think science will be able to teach us differently. So Aaron Lichtenstein, who is Rabbi Sachs' teacher, he said, society is the vehicle of personal and collective beatitude. In other words, im ein ani li mili uksha'ani la'atzmi ma'ani. So at the heart of my talk is actually two studies that I did together with Nomi, who's here, and with Gila Shapiro, who was here yesterday. Two studies which we did thinking about and understanding evolution and talking about altruism and moral elevation. So the first one was a study that we reproduced based on a study done in the UK, and it goes something like this. Or it will go something like this. Please imagine you're a Martian biologist who's come to Earth to study human beings. When you arrive, the only humans on the planet are living in a remote corner of Madagascar. They live by hunting birds and small mammals. They used to live in dense forests, but hundreds of years ago the forest was cut down and they now live on open and sandy plains. They have either black or blonde hair. Back in the days when there was a dense forest where they lived, almost all of them had black hair. This gave them good camouflage in the forest. Nowadays, almost all of them have blonde hair. This gives them good camouflage on the open sandy plains where they now live. Please answer the following questions as best as you can, giving this information. If you're not sure, please guess, etc., etc. So then you ask them a whole list of questions that have to do with human evolution or human behavior. If you see a human cutting down trees in the morning, would you assume all humans were going to cut down trees in the morning? If they look for honey in beehives in the afternoon, would you assume that they would also look for honey in beehives in the afternoon, etc., etc.? And when you ask them the question about the humans first, it seems to be they get the answers really wrong. They don't understand that behavioral traits can be passed down from human to human. They understand what happens, why they went from dark hair to light hair. That's just a coincidence from yesterday, right? So they understand how you can get from dark hair to white hair. But they wouldn't necessarily assume that because the first set of humans were harvesting honey in the afternoon, that all humans were harvesting honey in the afternoon. But then you can ask them this set of questions. Please imagine you're a Martian biologist who has come to Earth to study an animal called the fossa, which only lives in a remote corner of Madagascar. It lives by hunting birds and small mammals. It used to live in a dense forest, but hundreds of years ago the forest was cut down, and now it lives in open, sandy plains. Fossas have either black or white coats. Back in the days, there was a dense forest where they lived, and almost all fossas had black coats, dark hair, black coats. This gave them good camouflage in the forest. Nowadays, almost all fossas have white coats. This gives them good camouflage in the open and sandy plains where they now live. And please answer the set of questions. When you ask them about fossas, they do okay. They understand that evolution can have an impact on how the fossas will behave, not only how they look. But if you ask them again how the humans go, they didn't do it. But if you show them first the fossas, and then you show them the humans, all of a sudden they get the idea. right? So that you can say, imagine that you come upon the first human you've ever met, and you study his behavior. You observe that he is most active very early in the morning, has his sleep in the afternoon, and sharpens his knives on the trunks and small trees, and knows how to get honey from a beehive by making a hole in the hive wall. Now imagine that a few weeks later you come to know the human. Do you think he or she will behave the same? And the same type of thing about fasas. So when they ask questions, when we ask the questions first about the fasa, and then about the human, their ability to answer questions of human evolution was much better. In other words, they thought about first non-human evolution, and then they could say that humans did evolve. And they could see that that was connected. What we do know from the study is that evolution in education is severely lacking. So that's what we believe would why people made mistakes about evolution in general, and human evolution in particular. Again, if you thought about animal behavior first and then human behavior second, you could know that it worked. When you do the humans first, it didn't always portray further. You didn't improve people's scores if you did it. If you asked them about humans first, it didn't improve their scores about animals. What we also know is that the people who said that they prayed more than once a day did significantly worse on these studies than people who said that they didn't pray at all. Does it mean that religion makes people less believe in evolution? I think they probably got taught less evolution. And of the 65 or so people who I studied, only one was an atheist. So that's another interesting finding, is that very few people in Israel actually identify as atheists. Right? We have one of the most believing countries in the world, even if we're not higher practice. And one other thing which I found was when I was looking for a translation of The Descent of Man, it's been translated into Yiddish, it hasn't been translated into Hebrew. Go figure. So, but anyway. So now the second study on moral evolution. So this I'll freely translate. In Israel and in the world, there are many people that have illnesses in liver and kidney function, and they need all sorts of transplants. Okay, Yaron, a bachelor, is in good health. He reads in the newspaper that there needs to be a kidney transplant. After he does his blood tests, Yaron finds that he actually can donate, and he's a matching donator. And then he has a set the date for his operation. And he says, "Look, you know what? When you have an operation, you might actually die." But anyway, he hesitates a little bit. He signs it, and then you go in, right? So when you read this more smoothly than I translated it, people get that sense of wow. They get that sense of wow. This is a good guy. This is a good person. It's interesting because we said we changed it when we changed it from someone who was a bachelor to someone who was married. And when we changed the sexes, that the fact that they're married with children has a significant impact on how well they think, how well the people become morally elevated by listening to this story. And of course, you can talk about Yaron, who is a bachelor, who goes from Jerusalem into a mall where people where he doesn't know, and all of a sudden he sees a hand grenade thrown, and he throws himself on the hand grenade, saving 5 other people, ultimately dying. And again, there's people say, "Wow, this is quite an interesting thing to do, and I feel good about reading this story." In the first case, they say, "Yeah, I might do that." In the second case, they say, that makes me feel good to read this story. I'm not sure I would do that, but because that's a whole self-sacrifice as opposed to the simple altruistic deed of donating a kidney, and we all know you can leave with 1 kidney. So then we asked another question. Rena, again, that's only because to show you that we did it with women as well. She moved to a new neighborhood. And all of a sudden, as she's walking out of her neighborhood, she finds that there's a house on fire. Inside, she says, "I hear a child screaming." It's not her child. She's unmarried, and she hesitates and she runs in and she saves the kid. And again, we ask people, would they identify with that? Do they think she's a smart person? Do she's a good person? Does she need psychological therapy? Does she know those things? And basically, you get all the answers that you would predict, right? And in all cases, you're saving 1 people, 5 people. The people are putting themselves at risk in order to save people who they're not particularly related to, or who they have no relation to because they have no idea. So just there's a survey here. How many people in the room would do any of those things? Would do some type of altruistic act in order to save 1 or 5 people? Right? Most of you will. Okay? So then we ask them this question. We know that there's a need in the world for all sorts of kidney and heart donations. So this person, Rena, walks in and says, I'm perfectly healthy. I want to donate my 2 kidneys, my lungs, and my heart to save 6 people. How many of us would do that? Right? But we might throw ourselves on a hand grenade to save 5 people. We might. We certainly would say, I'd like to try to run into a house if I thought that there was a kid there, but I wouldn't go in and donate all of my internal organs in order to save 5 people. But why not? Why not? Why wouldn't I do that?
Because one requires cognitive evaluation, and the other requires a conative action.
An action, yeah. So, because, right, the altruistic stories is I would identify with them. Altruism, moral elevation, and identification. And what are the limits of altruism is that, here, well, I'll get to the intuition in a moment, right? It's sort of the classic trolley problems, right? The classic trolley problems are, trolley is going down the track, and you see 5 people over there, and you see that the switch can go, and you see that the trolley is going to roll over those 5 people. But if you throw a switch, it'll only kill 1. Do you throw the switch, right? And this comes down to our discussion about artificial intelligence, right? Do you design a car? Right? Do you design a car that's going to kill 1 person instead of 5? Right? And we would all choose the car that's going to kill 1 person instead of 5. But then he asks people, well, what if the person is the occupant and you're the occupant? Mm-hmm. Right? What do you do then? Right? Right? Because, right, it's my car. I'm 1 person and those are 5. Right? The difference between 1 person and 1 mailbox, that's easy. Between one person, 1 pedestrian, and 5 pedestrians, it's a big difference. But I'm the owner of the car. Do I want a car that's going to kill me? Or do I want a car that's going to kill 5 people who aren't me? Right? And I'm the owner. In a car accident, yeah. But why not donate 5 organs to save 5 people? Right? That's the question. Right? So, evolution in education is severely lacking. Mistakes about evolution in general, human evolution in particular, not only physical but behavioral as well. And then what do genes have to do with self-sacrifice? Okay, science in general and evolution in particular can tell us how to develop or evolve mimetically cooperating altruistic societies from small groups, making connections, knowing as many of them as possible, even non-genetic kin, as we heard, and that's one of the other additions I did make, the non-genetic kin in Cuba, whether that's really what happens or whether it's sort of a different, an interesting study of it is secondary. Right? The world is a village. We need to cooperate in order to save the world, and sometimes we need to compete hard, like in the hawk versus dove. And we need to overcome our intuition to develop Darwin's idea of a moral sense or conscience. Right? We need to develop, and that's the difference between donating 5 organs or just saving 5 people randomly. The idea is it's intuitive. How does that intuition work? Well, Danny Kahneman can talk about that, and Richard Haidt can talk about that. Intuition works because we're sort of on that train and we go. Or Jonathan Haidt talks about the elephant and the rider. The elephant is going along, and it's really hard to sway it one way or another. right? But with a little bit of reasoning, we can maybe direct the elephant to go to the left or to the right, but really that elephant is just taking us along. So trolleys and cars and hand grenades and organs and artificial intelligence, we get the sense that it's intuitive. But why? And what I want to contend tonight as a summary is that we need Darwin to tell us that any animal or being, whatever, endowed with well-marked social instincts would inevitably acquire a moral sense or conscience. In order for Rav Kook to say, the study of evolution can bring us closer to the Creator and better able to understand God's will. We need Kahneman to say thinking fast and thinking slow. We have these two types of thought of thinking fast and thinking slow, so that we can have Soloveitchik, who says if we want to understand the world of biology, we have to appreciate the scientific mechanism of evolution. We can have Jonathan Haidt, who talks about moral matrices, that we're not all based on 3 different types of matrices, but there are people who talk about more moral matrices, so that Jonathan Sachs can say the notion that the authenticity means making our own rules is the loss of the world beyond the value of the self. People on people on the left don't really relate to people on the right because the people on the right have additional types of moral concerns. Not because they're immoral people, but because they consider other things as moral. We need Paul Bloom to say humans do have a rudimentary moral sense of self from very early life. To say, for Lichtenstein, to say society is a vehicle of personal and collective beatitude. We need Wilson and Wilson, whether we agree with group selection or not, that says selfishness beats altruism within groups, and altruistic groups beat selfish groups. Everything else is commentary. In order to get to the Mishnah in Avot, im ein ani li mili, ukshna li latzmi ma'ani, and in the end I have to say that Noma is no more, right? And if I say it the way I grew up, it's Noma is no more, and it really comes out really good, is that we have to interact. To say that religion is out there and it has nothing to do with immunology is irrelevant. To say that religion is out there and it doesn't prove anything about why people saved people in the Holocaust is irrelevant. To say that science doesn't make us have any other types of intuition is not a not a worthwhile statement anymore. To say, as Stephen Jay Gould said, that they're non-overlapping magisteria, well, it doesn't hold water anymore. We can't keep ourselves in these two different realms anymore. And so we say whatever being, any being, whatever endowed with a well-marked social instincts would inevitably acquire a moral sense or conscience, given enough time. But, if we don't do it now, I don't know when we have to do it. And then wouldn't it be nice if Ki Mitzion Teitzei Torah? Thank you. So.
You put an awful lot of weight on what Charles Darwin said about the moral sense. Couldn't he have been wrong? And you disagreed with Stephen Jay Gould. I mean, I don't agree with that statement about A, it's untestable, and B, if I had to bet, he'd probably be wrong. And yet that seems to be the linchpin of much of your...
You don't agree with Gould, you don't agree with Darwin?
I don't agree with Darwin about the moral sense. Certainly it would develop in any... I mean, you talk about an untestable hypothesis.
Well, we could observe and say, do chimpanzees behave in some type of moral fashion?
I would suggest that without language, okay, and traditional things stating this is good and this is bad, we wouldn't have things that we would call, we might say things, oh, that's kind of like morality, but I'm not sure that we really would call something literally morality. Without language and being told you should do this, you should do that. I think that's how we use the word morality to refer to that kind of talk about what's good and bad.
Rats don't typically reproduce with their own kin. So is that moral, or does that look like moral?
I would say people would not really call that moral behavior. They would look at you and go, well, what do you mean that's not doing morality?
Right.
Rats typically eat some of their offspring in the environments.
Right. But if a brother and sister are on a trip, right, and they decide, right, she's taking birth control, he uses a condom. I really want to know what it's like to have sex with my sister. Would we say they're immoral?
Yes, because we've been told, we've heard the language saying that's immoral that's incest and that's immoral. So again, I think that's the point to view that we use the word morality to refer to talk about what's good and bad, what we've been told, say from previous generations, what's good and bad, without that kind of talk being passed down. I don't think we call the rat.
You wouldn't call a rat moral. You wouldn't call a rat moral.
No.
Okay.
But in
I
that,
like rats.
but in the quality experiment that you just played out, there's a disgust reaction, right? And they're tapping in to this notion that we have this primary emotion of disgust, and the brother-sister thing leads to suboptimal sexuality, and we have a disgust reaction to it. I think Leon Katz actually wants us to continue to use primary emotional responses.
Right.
I agree. I'm not sure we call this rat behavior
What
more.
we would call the incest, the fact that people say that's an immoral behavior, that people say that doesn't. The fact we get disgusted disgusted something isn't necessarily moral. Being told not to do something is what.
Or maybe morality. Maybe this is what morality is like conscious. It doesn't really exist. It's just we decided it exists. Reification. Right? We decide that that's what it's about. And maybe there isn't a real morality. It's just really so we don't have kids with 7 heads.
You didn't really discuss immorality in this presentation. You discussed altruism. That's not doing. You didn't discuss the bad things that people did. And I can see how animals actually do altruistic things. Like sometimes, I don't know, like a goat adopts a baby dog, like a sheep adopts a baby dog. You do see that actually in animals.
Right.
So I don't know if that's morality,
Well,
but it is altruistic.
It's altruistic. Yeah. So right.
It could be instinct. It could be explains the instinct.
Well, what I want to say is altruism is instinctual. Yeah.
One of the things I think is sort of interesting in this talk is, we're basically suggesting when do we cooperate, when do we compete? And this leads especially back to biology, to parasites and symbionts. Mm-hmm. And if you look at Dawkins, he's going to tell you that a parasite is basically something that uses another entity for its replication against that other entity's interest in replication. So when we symbiotically, we're both replicating together in cooperation. And so it seems to me that we can maybe even throw out morality altogether and say what we need to do is get to a point where we realize all of our replicating interests are in common together.
Well, ultimately, without getting too geopolitical, wouldn't it be great if we could decide that it's in the interest of everybody to make sure we have fewer gases that are leading to global climate change, right? If we could work together on that, right, as an altruistic, because it's good for China like it's good for the United States, right, without even discussing the suicide terror and stuff like that, right? It's really, if we could at least cooperate on that, and at least get the altruistic turn on to say, okay, we should work towards limiting greenhouse gases, then we'd be in a better position to say that the world is the group. Right, and perhaps what happened is we got to that world group, and then those competitors are coming in.
Well, there's an assumption by lots of people, evolutionists, who evaluate religion, that it is basically a cognitive behavior, where evaluation occurs and beliefs result as a result of that evaluation and so on. What about the idea? I wouldn't use the word instinctual. But I would use the term conative. Suppose traditions are copied and observed, not based on an evaluation that someone has made. Gee, grandfather used to do this, and is that a good idea for us to do this now? And they have a sikha with everybody in their group, and they decide on things. I don't think that's the way things worked in human history. Mm-hmm. I think they did it just because that's who we are. These are the things that we do. And oftentimes their responses, I would say, are conative, which is to say they just respond. Mm-hmm. If they hear the talk, like Craig has talked about, and they get the idea of what the tradition is, when they're supposed to do it, when do they plant the rice on these terraces, at what time of the year, and so on. So whatever it is, they just do it. And it doesn't mean there isn't variation from generation to generation. but it's not something that is evaluated. We project that backwards from modernity into
Right, yeah.
deep human time.
Right, it's a tradition.
The model just is such a misfit.
No, it's a tradition. We pass it on and we do it because that's what we do. Yeah.
We just do it.
Right, and if you look at the breaking places between religion and science, those things became, we don't do that anymore. Right, when Galileo said the sun goes around, the earth goes around the sun, that was, that's terrible, right? And then the nail in the coffin was evolution with Darwin. It's like, no, but we have to talk about those traditions. I think that those traditions, certainly, if I look, it's interesting though, because my grandfather did a lot less than my parents, and I do a lot more than my parents, right? And my sons even continue a little bit more than I, right? So, but how do you? Those are the changing and evolving of the traditions, right? So it works in all sorts of different ways, and so, right, yeah. But again, I think what I want to say is that religion can't exist without science anymore. Religion needs to figure out, okay, religion as a representative cultural and society needs to focus in and say, this is what we know now, how to create traditions. We know how traditions, so we need to talk about it a lot. We need to. And what Jonathan Sachs says is, if we just say what's good for me is what's good for everybody, then we're going to be in a not a good place.
Speaking of altruism and the advantages of it, also in your talk, but also in previous talks, I'm just curious for you, evolutionists, and I'm sorry for getting very political, but one of the things you hear a lot from, you hear sometimes from Muslim extremists, also in this country and also other places, are sayings like, we've heard often, we will win because we love death and you love life. I've heard that a few times. And the willingness to, I've also heard people from the inside, Muslims saying, they're just saying that, it's just propaganda, that mothers are always still saying their sons die. Nevertheless, in fact, the mothers say it, or other people around it say it, and it's recurring. Does that give an evolutionary advantage to Islam now against a culture that's liberal and puts human life at the top? Does that mean that they will win the evolutionary culture wars because by their willingness to die for their group?
I'll give you a two-level answer. One is, I think what happened is that the United States and Europe out-cooperated themselves. And so they became this group of big cooperators, which left a hole for that big competitor called Islamic fundamentalism to come in. And so we can look at Wilson and Wilson and say, maybe it's not necessarily group selection, but there certainly is a way that groups act as organisms with each other. I also believe that the Muslim who goes in and kills himself believes he's acting altruistically for his own group.
Right, that's my point. So does that mean they'll win because they're willing to kill themselves for their group and the West?
Well, ultimately what happens in the models with inoculation is that people, then the cooperators become much stronger and much more like hawks. The question is, if it's not going to happen now, when it's going to happen. Another thing is, it's kind of funny, again, for me to quote Freud, but I'll quote Freud, or at least a Freudian colleague of mine, who says one of the reasons why so many people don't commit suicide is because they don't know what's waiting for them, and this suffering that I know now is bad enough, but if I don't know what's going to be there. But if I know what's going to happen and I'm going to get what I'm going to get there, then wow, that's really good. Then I know what I'm going towards. I'm going to get George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, 70 Virginians.
You've displayed that evolution needs to be in the education system. So my question for you, and you may want to open it up to your colleagues and the other speakers, how will you get evolution into the education system? General studies, Jewish studies, from what age? What are you going to call it?
Nomi, who is a biologist, teaches biology. She'll tell you.
Well, they don't teach evolution even for the biological program. It's not obligatory. You can teach it, but then when I taught it, I discovered that it's 14 years behind. And I had to say to my students, this is what it said, this is what the exam is about, but then I'll tell you what the updated theories there. So it's very, and another story I can tell, they teach ecology for, I think, the 8th grade or something, or the 9th. In any case, one of my nephews went to a religious school, and then he came up and said that the teacher told them that there is an ecology for men and ecology for animals. And I said nothing. I was at the table, and my sister and my brother-in-law said together, "What? What's this?" You know. And he didn't stay at that school. But in any case, this is how they teach ecology, not to mention evolution. I mean,
Right, and this was when Shai Piron, the former Minister of Education, wanted to bring evolutionary study into high schools. We defy.
I mean, they simply don't teach it. I'm teaching in an engineering school, and we somehow got into evolution. And I asked the students, how many of you ever learned about evolution? In a class of 30, maybe 3 students had it in high school. They had no clue. Mm-hmm. And they went to regular high school.
They didn't go to religious high schools. They didn't go. No. I think it's very telling that there is no Hebrew word for evolutia, right? There is no Hebrew word for evolution. It has never been translated. It's the descent of man is only in Yiddish and not in Hebrew, right?
we have so much.
Yeah.
Historical archaeology here in Israel. So much to learn, so much to see.
So do you agree with Sam Harris that with the moral landscape? Are you sort of in that camp that, if we're going to talk about anything, it has to have to do with sentient creatures, and we can see what leads things to flourish, and we can see things that leads to not flourishing?
Yeah, although I don't think that flourishing and happiness is the be-all and end-all. It could be that sometimes we want to say that, a little suffering is okay. Right. I mean, he and Jonathan Haidt were very much on this happiness.
And Joshua Green's the same way.
Right.
Some sort of practical utilitarianism.
Right. Sam Harris, I tried to find stuff I didn't agree with, but then when he says no, the Muslims believe what they want to believe. Is okay, I can agree with that. So if we could lead to human look, I think what I said is if we could really figure out how to tame these greenhouse gases, that would lead to human flourishing. So is that the only measure? I think it's a good start. And we have to figure out what other things could lead to that.